This is the
Five Starr
Podcast.
Let me talk to you. Hi. What do you guys want to talk about? This is such good shit. Thanks, guys. Back to you.
This is probably the earliest I've ever sat down to record one of these things on a Sunday. But it worked out that way, so why not? I'm awake. It's bright and early. The sun is shining. Most people are probably asleep right about now. But I got to get a head start. So, what better way to wake people up than have me scream about Retro Raw? And other assorted topics, of course. It's not just Raw that's the problem. I've also been in a bad habit of doing the regular introductory plugs, so, I want to make sure I get that out of the way. If anybody is new here to the FSWR channel, make sure you subscribe, comment, like the show for me. You can also find us on Rumble each Monday and Friday for new content and new podcast material. Today for the Monday show, I think it's normally scheduled programming. We got Retro Raw, Retro NXT, and Friday Night SmackDown reports to go over. Next weekend will be a little bit different of a format because of the Elimination Chamber show. But we've been fairly consistent in the last 6 or so months with this format. And I think we'll keep it that way for the time being. I don't foresee any reason to change the way we do things right now for the Monday show. I've canned a lot of the modern wrestling talk outside WWE just because so much of it's just bad and not worth my time anymore. At least with Retro Raw and Retro NXT, there's a little bit of history there that I find is worth going back to talk about. Yeah, I know if you're an avid watcher of the channel since we started this little journey a couple years ago, I've made a lot of modifications to the way we do things. It's been a trial and error process, but I think we finally have something worth sticking to. I know with these Retro Raws, I find myself regretting that decision a lot of the time. But what do you say we dive into the cesspool and see what horrors await us on the other side with Retro Raw from 1995 this week? So last week was Valentine's Day, which meant no show. This week was the week after Valentine's Day, which I guess by default meant doubly the horrible show. Boy, did they strike back with a vengeance. After that nice 1 week vacation we got, Vince grabbed us by the ball sack this week and twisted until those little nutties flew right off. Those poor Macon, Georgia fans, dude. You could even sense the disgust in Vince's intonation when he had to utter the town Macon, Georgia. Not his home turf. So yeah, we're back with Retro Raw. And we're kind of in that awkward middle ground state right now where the Rumble's about a month removed, but we still have a couple more months before WrestleMania. And since WWF didn't do the intermediate pay-per-views between Rumble and Mania season, we basically have this 2-month window where they're attempting to generate some build for the Mania card, but we've still got a lot of meaningless filler on these 45-minute programs, and it's hard to get through. And unfortunately, their featured bout for this week's card was not in any way enticing on paper. scheduled for the main event, it is Diesel defending the WWF Championship against Double J. And from the moment they expected me to take Double J seriously as a credible title challenger when he was wearing those ridiculous light-up flickering glasses, that is where I tapped out and said, yup, it's still Raw. Even the semi-serious pro wrestlers on this show have to be made to look like complete jokes. Now, of course, that wasn't the only story development on this one. We'll talk about the Shawn Bodyguard reveal a bit later on. Our first actual match on the card was the returning Bam Bam Bigelow versus Gary Sabaw. As some of you may recall, if you're following along in our 1995 timeline, Bam Bam was suspended in storyline for getting into a shoving match with Lawrence Taylor back at the Royal Rumble. And we've had these horribly scripted pre-tapes where these fake lawyers representing Taylor were trying to throw out cease and desist letters to get Bam Bam to stop threatening LT by having him get in the ring to wrestle a match. This week, we had another fake attorney issuing a warning to Bam Bam, explaining that if he doesn't leave Lawrence Taylor alone, his counsel will be seeking legal repercussion. And I was fully convinced that the man representing Taylor in this pre-tape, this Anthony Giampapa fella or whatever his name was, I cannot believe that was his actual real name. There's also no way this was his real hair. This had to have been one of the worst toupee jobs I think I've ever seen. So the cartoon elements are back in full swing this week. And again, people, here's the part we have to remember in all this. Bam Bam Bigelow is supposed to be the heel in this feud. Lawrence Taylor, the alleged babyface, he's the one that's cowering in fear, refusing to take part in Bam Bam's challenge. All Bam Bam has done is call him out to wrestle a match. We're supposed to boo Bam Bam Bigelow for this? Someone please help me. I'm so lost. Even Jim Cornette was calling out some of the nonsensical character dynamics on commentary. He also couldn't help but make an Italian Stallion reference during this segment, making sure to let everybody know that Gary could down an entire pound of pasta in under 30 seconds. Right, because he's Italian, you see. So Bam Bam went over with a diving headbutt in a match that probably should not have been as competitive as it was. But you could probably say that about a lot of WWF matches in the mid-90s. And then Bam Bam got on the mic again and called Lawrence Taylor a coward for continuing to duck his challenge. And again, everybody, Bam Bam Bigelow, heel, the villain, the guy we are supposed to hate, issuing a fair one-on-one challenge to a guy that disrespected him on pay-per-view several weeks ago. And the protagonist in this feud, the one we're all supposed to get behind and cheer for, still MIA. Still hiding under his blanket, shaking in his boots. What a real hero that Lawrence Taylor is. He's sure sticking it to Bam Bam Bigelow right about now. Looking like a real badass. Well, I can ratify one man who for sure was not a badass on this program. His name was Adam Bomb. You have never seen or heard anybody less badass than Adam Bomb. Especially babyface Adam Bomb. So he and Rip Rogers had a pretty horrendous 2-minute match. And I mostly put the blame on Adam Bomb for that because I've seen Rip Rogers' work. He was a much better worker than Adam fucking Bomb ever was. Even he couldn't carry this guy to anything remotely watchable. This was the match, too, where I noticed that the ring sounded like it was being suspended by a chain link from underneath. Every single time somebody took a bump, it sounded like somebody rattling a dog fence. Like, I was starting to think the ring was going to break in half at one point. Somehow it didn't. It was just really annoying to listen to anytime someone took a bump. Adam Bomb also went over here with a top rope move. Instead of using the diving headbutt, though, it was the diving lariat that put away Rogers for the 3 count. The rest of the match was the usual lousy Brian Clark offense. Really nothing to say about it beyond every other comment I've made about Clark's work throughout his career. He was not very good. You don't believe me? Ask The Undertaker about having to work with him later on. Then we had a quick pre-tape from a WWF Superstars clip. Bret Hart being awarded the Award of the People award. It was a very cut and dry Bret Hart babyface promo, meaning that I think I fell asleep at least 3 times in the span of his minute-long speech. But, no, it sounded heartfelt. And since I never buy the legitimacy of artificial award plaques, regardless of the individual being put over, this segment really didn't do a whole lot for me. And that led into this King's Court segment. We have Jerry Lawler tearing down Bret Hart and the WWF magazine editors, stating that if the Japanese voters had any say in who the Award of the People should be presented to, Bret would have been laughed out of the building. But because Bret Hart doesn't have any respect for Japanese voters, that makes him a racist. Excuse me. A racist, you say? Well, it's too bad they didn't give Lawler a chance to elaborate before Shawn Michaels abruptly cut him off. I really don't understand how we went from the subject of Bret Hart being waged as the Award of the People to him being called a racist for rejecting Japanese voters. How exactly did we get there again? Well, in any case, that wasn't the important part of the segment. The important part was getting clarity on who the mystery bodyguard was going to be for Shawn Michaels. He's been leaving us with crumbs to build up to this moment, but he promised it wouldn't disappoint. And, well, for some it may have been a disappointment. For me, it was an iconic moment, because I've always kind of had a very strange love-hate relationship with this man. To save you the trouble of the suspense, after Shawn spent a couple minutes putting himself over and admitting that even someone as talented as him can't take on the entire WWF roster by himself, he explains that he has the meal ticket to guarantee his future success, and his name is Sid Vicious. Naturally, with Jim Cornette on commentary, his immediate reaction was, "Oh shit, Vince! You didn't tell me this guy was going to be here." May as well have just broken the fourth wall and said, "Did you bring Danny Spivey along for the ride too?" Now, of course, this wasn't Sid's first rodeo to the WWF. He was there in early '92 working with Hogan headed into WrestleMania 8. And I don't remember all the details of what led to his departure later that year. I think it was something involving a failed drug test or whatever. And he basically served out the remainder of his contract at home before he was unceremoniously let go. And he was back in WCW for another couple years before he returned here in 95. I mean, Sid basically spent the entirety of the 90s bouncing back between the two major promotions, just back and forth, back and forth. Really didn't stay in one place for a long stretch of time. Driving Vince up a wall for making his life miserable to do business with. I mean, he at least lasted a couple years in this go-around on a full-time basis. Well, full-time, as in whenever it didn't interfere with his softball schedule. In any case, yes, Sid is the new Diesel bodyguard. And his explanation for why he linked up with Shawn is very simple. He is the kind of cold-hearted man that feels no remorse or pity for anybody he gets his hands on. And with him and Shawn side by side, through good times and bad, together they will rule the world. And it's important to bear in mind, too, the entire time this promo was happening, there's like 50 other things going on in the background. You got Sid trying to remember what the hell he's even supposed to say. You got Shawn going through like 80 different facial expressions, not knowing what the hell this promo was going to lead to. And all the while, there's Lawler holding the microphone out for Sid, desperately trying to hold back from laughing. Like, you could tell they were methodically trying to keep the camera off of him as much as humanly possible. And I was mainly fixated on Sid here because, well, for good or bad, this has always been the charm of Sid's promos. They're train wreck level horrible, but you believe every single word that guy says. He's so convincing in his delivery. Like when he's there turning beet red and screaming a bunch of bullshit off the top of his head, you totally believe that guy's on crazy pills. And it's why I've always kind of had a soft spot for Sid. Again, as much of a pain in the ass as he was to do business with back in the day, he had some legendary, memorable moments throughout the 90s, both in WWF and WCW. And I can never find it in my heart to hate the guy. So, we'll stay on the Sid-Shawn Michaels pairing and see what happens. They definitely made an impression here. A segment filled with utter confusion and great laughable TV. So even on this wretched program, we still had a good moment. What wasn't good was the match that followed. A completely random tag squash with the Blue Brothers versus Mark Starr and Leroy Howard. By far one of the most overpushed, overexposed tag teams throughout the history of the 90s. And I never understood why. The fucking Harris brothers. God, were they horrible. With or without hair. I don't care how good of friends they were with Jim Cornette. They were the absolute shits. And to make it worse, you got poor Dirty Dutch out there having to work the manager role. All these two idiots are in there fucking up spots left and right. I don't even remember where this happened in the match, but I wrote it down here because it was particularly egregious. Okay, so one of the Harris brothers goes to Irish whip Starr off the ropes. I can't even explain what the hell they were trying to do here. But I think the other Harris brother may have forgotten the spot. Because the one brother goes to lift up Starr like he's about to set him up for a double team move. But the other Harris brother is like 10 feet away, not even paying attention. So then the other Harris, who is still holding up Starr over his shoulder for a hot second, he finally goes, well, this guy clearly forgot what we were supposed to do. Then he gave him this really sloppy-looking spine buster that looked like they were both bumping in molasses. Actually, that may have been the finishing spot now that I think back, because like I remember they went to the pinfall immediately after that. Like, I was about to leave the room to go take a piss, and then about 5 seconds later, I heard the bell ring, and the Harris brothers won. I don't even know how. But, yeah, this about sucked. Two more generic big guys that were about as mobile as a paraplegic. But of course they were big. So you knew Vince was going to push him to the moon. Because they were butt buddies with Russo during their WCW run in the late 90s. They also got rammed up our anal cavities nonstop. Speaking of guys getting rammed up our anal cavities, with the TV main event, Double J Jeff Jarrett challenging Diesel for the WWF Championship. It is the most activity we've seen from Diesel on an episode of Raw since winning the WWF title last year. And I think the big question in all this, how hard was Jeff going to have to work to make this remotely interesting? It was the equivalent of swimming up Schitt's Creek without a paddle, but, well, they definitely tried some stuff. They did just about every old school heel ploy in the book to make Double J look like a dope, including the spot where the heel lackey tries to get involved, but ends up getting humiliated as well. In this instance, they shoot the spot before the commercial break where Diesel's trying to pull Jarrett into the ring by his arm, and then Road Dogg's on the other side trying to pull Jarrett out to the floor. But then Hebner kicks Roddy's arm out, which sends him spilling over the top rope, almost landing right on his neck in the process. Hebner was actually getting a lot more physically involved than I was used to seeing, grabbing a handful of Jeff's hair to pry him out of the corner at one point. Earl don't fuck around, man. That guy's all business. They eventually come back from break with Jarrett cutting off Diesel. Roddy got in a couple dirty shots behind Hebner's back, but it was all pretty basic heel stuff. And then Diesel eventually fires back on Jarrett, catches him with the snake eyes. This is where I really started to question the level of the crowd sweetening. Like, from the canned audio, it sounded like these people were going nuts for everything Diesel was doing. But if you look at everybody in the room, like, most people are still sitting on their hands, completely disinterested. So I don't know what was going on there. I know Diesel's popularity around this time wasn't all that high to begin with, so I'm thinking they were playing around in the production truck a little bit. But Diesel eventually went over with the jackknife. And then to make sure the heels were even more chastened by the end, Diesel also gave Road Dogg a jackknife for his troubles. And from that point, I guess because we still had about 5 minutes left of airtime, they needed to awkwardly kill remaining TV time by having Shawn Michaels and Sid Vicious stand in the aisleway. This actually went through a commercial break. They came out right at the tail end of Diesel's match, and then when they came back, Diesel completely vanishes, but then Shawn and Sid are still standing in the aisleway. And they stand there. They stand there. They keep standing there. Time passes. The announcers are talking about this, that, and the other thing. And then finally, they just start randomly making their way down to ringside for a quick little interview with Jim Cornette. And Shawn pretty much covers everything he addressed earlier on about how Sid is a dangerous man, and he wouldn't want to be in Diesel's shoes right about now, because anything he was ever capable of doing, Sid can do much better and more vicious. While he's rambling on for another minute or so, Vince pretty much cuts him off and pitches to their final break. All the while, they're panning the camera to Sid's chest hair, which was visibly disturbing, albeit. And that was pretty much how they wrapped the program up. It was very weird. Not entirely sure why we needed this random interview segment, which accomplished virtually nothing. If you want my opinion, I think it was a formatting cover-up. Some tells me that previous match ended a little early, so they had to stall for time. This is the best they could come up with. But, yeah, this one was pretty miserable to sit through. Take out the Sid reveal. It was every problematic Raw we've talked about throughout the majority of these 95 shows thus far. Just muddied up with bad gimmick after bad gimmick. Storylines are all over the map. People are mostly sitting on their hands, not really reacting to anything. Maybe that was just a Macon, Georgia thing. Some tells me it's hard to be happy when you're a citizen of Macon, Georgia. But, that was our reward for not having an episode of Raw to review last week. They came back 7 days later and gave us this piece of shit. Well, maybe SmackDown will help me simmer down for a minute, you know? At least with this show, the Roman Cody Rock story is still relatively hot. Guess you got to throw Rollins in there as the awkward fourth wheel. But, again, much like the conversation we had last week when it came to the whole Bloodline versus Cody Rhodes story, whatever forced WWE's hand into having to change their decision again, like not going with The Rock versus Roman at WrestleMania, even though all signs indicated that being the case just a few weeks ago, assuming it was the undivided rebellion of the fans showering The Rock with booze and chanting, "We want Cody." Well, we're here now, and I guess we're led to believe that everything that happened on TV just a few weeks ago never took place. Now we're just right back to the original plans as intended. Now, that doesn't mean Rock won't be involved. In fact, he was riding in style this week on the show, showing up in one of those giant Ford F-150s, which, got to admit, I did not expect Rock to drive one of those things. I've heard rumors from car experts those things are pieces of junk. You think a guy like The Rock would at least be able to afford a fucking Lamborghini. But they mentioned on last week's show that Rock and Roman would be here this week so Triple H could fix it. That was her cliffhanger. And the payoff, as we'll see later on, was false advertising. Not to play spoiler. But before we get into the only thing that really matters on the show, we also have this Elimination Chamber event coming up next week in Australia. So they're still running these qualifying matches to try to figure out who's going to be in the Chamber match, with the winner getting to wrestle Seth for the World Heavyweight title at WrestleMania. And as of this show, prior to the final two matches this week for the qualifiers, we already knew about Drew and Randy qualifying last week. And I also learned that on Raw this past week, Bobby Lashley and LA Knight were also added to the Chamber match. Again, for the record, no. I have no idea why Raw and SmackDown talents are able to compete in this match when this belt is a Raw exclusive championship. But I think that also implies that WWE actually follows the logic of the brand split. So that left two remaining slots. The first match we got this week was Kevin Owens versus Dom Mysterio. And as per usual with Dirty Dom, anytime they give him a live mic to attempt to cut a promo, they crank up the canned heat to its max capacity. And it's not even so much about the material. It's just the simple fact that the gimmick with him is that he can never get a word in because he's constantly getting drowned out by the booze. I've never seen anything like it before. The match itself was kind of whatever. Dom's still very green, but Owens is a good enough worker to where he knows how to carry him to longer matches. The R-Truth stuff is still dumb. I don't care what people say. And it's been a recurring joke for years in WWE now. Always making him out to be a comedy jackass on TV. And like, it was funny for a while, but it's like the Santino-Morella dynamic. Do it for a year, fine. Do it for 7 years with no payoff, starts to have the opposite effect. And now he's starting to generate go-away heat with me just because I'm sick of seeing the fucking guy on my television. And I've always liked Truth as a talent. I just hate the way WWE's booked him for the last 10 plus years. You know, again, they try to idiot-proof this as best they could. Dom got visibly blown up in there by the end, you could tell. Started botching a few spots, and you could clearly hear Owens calling shit on the fly to try to course correct. But they did some stuff near the end where Dom tried to have Truth get a chair, and then Truth got the chair, but instead of giving it to Dom, he just kind of sat down in it. And then Owens capitalized and eventually won with a pop-up powerbomb. Again, I'm not following the shit they've been doing with Truth and the Judgment Day on Raw. For my sanity, it's probably best that I abstain from trying to search out those clips. I mean, the last thing I need to be seeing is the Judgment Day doing comedy stuff. So Owens won, which is fine. Kind of made things a little predictable for the Logan Paul Miz qualifier later, but I'll get to that in a bit. I did want to briefly applaud the interaction between Drew McIntyre and LA Knight in this little pre-tape they shot. Really good heated back and forth exchange here. And Drew's talking about how he's going to be the savior of WrestleMania this year. His chance to rectify having his WrestleMania moment stolen from him 4 years ago. And while he's going off, LA Knight swoops in and starts running his mouth on Drew. Tells him that since Knight's come to the WWE, Drew hasn't been a champion of anything. Drew tries to call out Knight by saying he's got a lot of jokes under his belt, but if he doesn't start collecting on winning belts, the people will turn on him instantly. His over-the-top gimmick personality is only going to carry so much weight. To which Knight thanks Drew for the veteran advice. And then he pulls up Drew's newest selling t-shirt from WWE Shop, saying there's one more little thing that he needs to add to that cartoon gravestone. Right next to CM Punk's WrestleMania aspirations, they can add Drew's Elimination Chamber aspirations. Of course, that's when all the referees step in to break up the fight. It was really good heated back and forth. Sounded authentic. Both guys sound like grown adult men. You know, they were throwing underhanded jabs at each other, but it was still a serious promo. Like, this is the kind of shit I wish we saw more of throughout these programs. Instead of their goofy pre-tapes with comedy clowns like Pretty Dreadly. Or any of the other jabronis that got shooting vignettes. I'll take more of this in a heartbeat. You know what I wouldn't take more of in a heartbeat? Is more of these girls' chamber qualifying matches. Especially when the options are me having to choose between Zelina Vega and Tiffany Stratton as probable contenders. All combined 130 pounds of them. And Tiffany being 2/3 of that combined weight. But I'll go ahead and save you the trouble. Skip to the end here because ain't nobody got time for this bullshit. Tiffany wins. So she's now part of the girls' chamber match with the likes of Liv Morgan, Becky Lynch, Bianca Belair, and later, as we come to find out, Naomi. And if there's ever a reason to block out a designated piss break spot for that show, that much might be the one to do it for. Christ almighty. So after a couple more quick pre-tapes that I very briefly scrubbed through, one of which was AJ getting into a slap fight with the Egghead Jobbers. Hopefully he slaps those boring, nondescript idiots back to New Japan so we never have to see him again. The other was a Damage Control pre-tape where Io, Asuka, and Kairi all try to sound and look intimidating. It was exactly as you would expect. There are few women in this company less intimidating looking than Io, Asuka, and or Kairi. Somehow I'm supposed to take them all seriously as badasses, though. I guess because they dress in goth clothing. Because Kairi wears a leather jacket. Ooh. So then the authors of Pain killed 2 NXT job guys in short notice. Apparently this new faction with Karrion Kross is still a thing they're pushing at the moment. The Final Testament. What is it, a Final Testament to? Nobody knows. Hopefully it's a final testament to the ending of the group. Because nobody gives a crap. Well, at least this Logan Paul interview made up for the previous handful of shitty segments. God, this guy's such a natural promo. It's kind of scary, actually, how good this guy is. Like, the simple fact that he knows how to carry himself as a heel on camera. And not just delivering the lines, not just saying the words, but actually working as a believable heel. He's talking about how it's his first televised match in WWE, so fans ought to be logging on to Twitter or X, whatever it's called now, starting a hashtag Thank You Logan, because it's such a monumental occasion. He says this is his opportunity to not only qualify for the Elimination Chamber, but to also win the match, rematch Seth at WrestleMania for the world title, beat him, and then Logan can go on to become a dual champion. And it's like, I mean, he's just so condescending with the way he delivers everything. He's got that Jerry Lawler slime ball delivery where he's so pompous and full of himself. Even when he's saying the most basic material, like, I'm going to win the chamber match and go on to wrestle Rollins for the title at Mania. But he says it with such certainty and haughtiness. Oh, and by the way, the Lawler comparison wasn't just because Logan used the word peon here. Although I did like that line. But yeah, this is great. I mean, he gets pro wrestling more than half these Ned Wood marks do today. The ones especially that spent their entire careers working on the indie circuit. Worshipping these fucking moves marks. At least Logan Paul knows how to be a personality. So what do you say we talk about Miz and Logan Paul? One of the few times where I'll probably ever say, let's talk about a Miz match. Now, obviously, these two have history together. In fact, didn't these guys work a tag match at WrestleMania a few years ago? I think they wrestled the Mysterios. And then Logan turned on Miz and they wound up feuding later on. Seems like ancient history at this point. And look how far Logan's come since. And the Miz is still the Miz. It's hard to really grade the match just because it was sort of a mixed bag. There were definitely some miscues at various points. I think the most obvious one was the deal early on where Logan went to try to do the standing moonsault press on a Miz, but he was like way out of position to take the move. So Logan kind of landed awkwardly across Miz's legs, and they both kind of fumbled over each other to try to roll the other up for a pin attempt. A couple little weird things during the comeback spot where they didn't seem to be on the same page with what they were supposed to do next. There was a lot of whiffing going on. But the people were behind Miz. They booed Logan pretty steadily. Miz tried to work over Logan's hamstring, which kind of set up the figure 4 spot later on. And they do the deal on the floor where Logan tried to have one of his buddies pass the brass knucks to him, but Miz cut him off and grabbed the knucks instead. And right as the official told Miz to ditch them at the risk of getting DQ'd, they attempted something here at the finishing spot. I'm not entirely sure what it was supposed to be. Basically, Logan kicked the middle rope into Miz's crotch, and then he pulled him into the ring to set up what I believe was intended to be some kind of modified STO. But both guys just sort of awkwardly fell forward as Logan went for the cover. It was not very fluid. Obviously, Logan winning wasn't all that surprising. After Owens won the previous qualifier, the writing was kind of on the wall here. It was fine as a match. I personally never thought Miz and Logan had all that great a chemistry to begin with. But, it was like a one and done to get Logan into the chamber at Perth. It worked. And again, I go back to what I said when it comes to Logan's work, dude. The guy's a natural. For the way he carries himself in the ring, the timing, the facial expressions, the way he sets up everything. He knows how to command attention. Everything he does is done with a purpose. And man, that really counts for something, especially this day and age, where everybody is so spot-oriented with their work and nothing ever makes sense. It's nice when guys actually take their time and milk the important moments. You want to have a good hand on standby for those NXT training seminars? Bring in Logan Paul, dude. I mean it. He'll show everyone a thing or two. But that rounds out the men's chamber match. Pretty interesting choice of guys they've got in there, but I really don't have any issues with the talent pool. They're all big names by their own right. They all look like athletes. Oh. They look like athletes, and Kevin Owens happens to be involved. But at least they're all stars. And even if it wasn't their ideal situation for how they wanted to originally book the 2024 Chamber match, this wasn't a bad fallback option. So we'll see what happens next weekend. I still think Drew's the obvious first choice to win, but God, who even knows anymore? It's impossible to predict anything in wrestling. But moving along here very rapidly, Naomi won her chamber qualifying match with, I forget the chick's name. It's either Alpha Fire or Ishmael Dawn. One of the recent green NXT call-ups who probably should not be on the main roster to begin with. But that's all I really care to comment on that one for. But let's talk about the big thing that everybody's got their mind on right now. It's time to get some clarity on this Roman Rock Cody saga. How is Triple H going to fix it? How is he going to rectify taking away Rock's WrestleMania main event? How will this battle for supremacy be resolved? More importantly, how is Triple H going to be factored into anything, period? Well, that's a good question. Because based on everything we saw in the final segment here, I think we still wound up with more questions than answers by the end. Which seems to be a common recurring theme with a lot of these Bloodline segments lately. A lot of questions, short on answers. Which I guess is a good idea if you're trying to leave everybody in suspense. But you've also got to give people an incentive to care. And what did we learn in this final segment? Well, let's break it down. DX style. First, Roman comes out leading the cavalry. He's calling the Salt Lake City fans stupid because they're booing what is about to be a momentous occasion for the Bloodline. It is the night they officially declare The Rock a member of the Bloodline. So cue Rocky to come out wearing whatever that golden designer jacket was supposed to be. It was definitely not something I expected The Rock to wear in a public sphere, but hey, gotta make an impression somehow. I mean, after all, this is The Rock's official coronation into the Bloodline. And at this point in the segment, you may as well have just taken a tarp and draped it over everybody else in the group, Roman included. Because Rocky was out there talking, and talking, and talking, and talking, and talking for what seemingly felt like 8 to 10 weeks to months. It would never end. And he is trying to be an entertaining heel to the best of his abilities, like calling all the fans every name in the book to get under their skin, saying they're all a bunch of crybabies for spoiling what was supposed to be the biggest WrestleMania event of all time, Rock versus Roman. But they threw it out the window because they're ungrateful simpletons. He's, calling the people inbred, trailer park trash, scum, fat asses. Pretty much any possible derogatory term you can think of that is still suitable for national cable TV. Yet somehow I'm supposed to take The Rock seriously wearing that fucking getup. There was a bit of comedy to this, I have to admit. But then he starts going into this really long, over-dramatic spiel, essentially asking the question, what is Cody's story? He mentions that he lost to Roman at last year's WrestleMania, and now he wants a rematch 12 months later, and that seems to be the bulk of the story. He talks about how ridiculous the whole thing is, and if you apply that logic to sports teams, every single one of those losing teams would come off as nothing more than petulant crybabies. He says that losing teams dust themselves off, get back up, and live to fight another day. But the WWE fans are nothing more than a bunch of spoiled, irritable children. So, of course, they're all going to flush the biggest WrestleMania event of all time down the toilet so they can see Cody finish the story. So, Rock vows that he will do everything in his power to ensure that Cody walks out of WrestleMania a loser. He says that Cody's story is ending, but the Bloodline story is just beginning. And as I mentioned a minute ago, for the moment Rock's music hit, you could have just blurred out Roman, Solo, Jimmy, and Paulie from the shot, because it was all Rock from that point onward. No one else ever spoke. They just kind of did that WWE thing where they awkwardly stand there expressionless, complete statues. Like Rock did his rambling 15-minute heel promo. By the end of it, I really don't know what it accomplished. Okay, so Rock is officially a member of the Bloodline. Didn't we already kind of establish that to be the case in that press scrum when Rock stood there by Roman's side and he was running down the family tree thing? Why did we need to officially coronate Rock into the group? Moreover, here's a question. Why are they spending so much time and attention on The Rock's material? Meanwhile, Roman's just kind of standing in the backdrop through most of it, not really doing anything. This is starting to become a thing where even if the match on paper is Roman versus Cody for the title, they're doing more to generate intrigue in the idea of Rock versus Cody, just with the way they're handling the promos. Roman's quickly becoming a third wheel in all this. And if they are going to do some kind of tag match with Cody and Rollins versus Roman and Rock, even that is kind of starting to take precedent over the actual Roman-Cody title match, which is kind of what this whole thing should be designed to build toward. I don't know, dude. There's a lot of moving parts in the storyline right now, and I'm not really sure if it's all being properly vetted. Yeah, I'm not saying The Rock shouldn't be involved. Of course he should. It's the fucking Rock. Guy's a huge star, and he'll generate publicity for the company outside the core WWE market that's already watching. I'm not saying you don't have the guy on TV, but again, what is the end game? I mean, is the bigger draw the moment Cody wins the title from Roman? Or is the bigger draw the tag match with Rock and Roman? And by that same token, wasn't this whole segment initially planned for Rock and Roman to confront Hunter personally? Isn't that why Paul Lee told Hunter that The Rock and Roman were going to be on the show to begin with? To address Triple H and make their intentions clear? Okay, so for one, where was Hunter? And two, did they make anything clear here by the end? Beyond the idea that Rock was going to fuck Cody at Mania? Not in the literal sense, I mean the figurative sense. I don't know. This whole thing seems kind of disjointed right now. Like, I am glad to see they're actually running with heel Rock and they're not trying to go against the grain. They recognize that people weren't sold on Rock as a babyface going up against Roman. So they're at least going out of their way to keep Rock heel. And that's a good business call. I think it'll be interesting to see what the interplay is between Jimmy and Solo. I mean, if there is ever a reason to flip Solo babyface sometime in the next year, this would be the opportune time to strike. But that's kind of where I'm at with all of it right now. Heel Rock is much more preferable to the tired old babyface Rock parody that we've seen for the last how many years on and off. At least there's a modicum of authenticity when we're hearing Rock do these heel promos and he's embracing his villain side because, I mean, the guy is kind of a prick. I just hope they don't undercut Roman in all this as we get closer to Mania, because that's kind of what I fear they're going to end up doing. Like the whole dynamic of him standing there while Rock takes control of the Bloodline segments. I'm not a fan of that. I think Rock needs to let Roman run the ship as much as possible. Elsewise we're going to reach a point where their top world champion is playing second fiddle to the guy who, deep down, I think we all know is kind of the bigger star. But again, the problem is they shouldn't be stressing that. And that's what I'm worried about. All in all, though, SmackDown continues to be about the Bloodline drama. The rest of the show was them trying to hard sell the Chamber event as much as possible. And again, we'll be reviewing that show next weekend, but I won't be doing a SmackDown report since it'll be the go-home show anyway. Based on the card they announced here for next week, doesn't look like I'll be missing out on much. LA Knight versus Drew McIntyre might be a fun match, but it's not really something I need to go out of my way to see. But we'll find out what they have in store for that show. Good old 5 a.m. Eastern start time here in the States. Will I be watching at 5 a.m.? Most likely no. But I'll at least be up by 7, so I can at least start watching it. Probably well after they've started the live stream. But I'll just make sure I avoid spoilers by going back and watching from the beginning. Okay, so I'm getting a really weird sense of deja vu here. Did they not begin last week's NXT program with an Ascension tag team squash? Or are these shows really starting to blend together already? On any case, this was the go-home edition before the very first NXT Takeover special. They were trying to get their ducks in a row to put together some last-minute pay-per-view hype. They announced a Legends panel for the NXT Arrival kickoff later that night at 7:30, which I believe streamed on the network at the time. A panel that consisted of Kevin Nash, Bret Hart, and Paul Heyman. That is a very random panel. Got a whole mismatch of random personalities in there. That one was just begging to die a rancid death. Hey, I've got a brilliant idea. We want to generate excitement for the first ever NXT special. Let's have Kevin Nash speak in long form. That ought to go over like a wet fart in church. And I'll bet it did. So getting back to this program, the Ascension wrestled two job guys, both of whom were completely identifiable. If they had names, I neglected to write them down. May as well have been Michael McGillibuddy and Bon Heifer Treffer. Typical Road Warriors like domination. Connor and Victor killed them in about a minute with a Fall of Man finish. Yet again, a circumstance where I believe, even though the Ascension are still considered heels at the time, they're getting more and more over with the NXT audience for just being ass-kicking machines. So as expected, they were starting to get over as babyfaces. I'm not sure if that was ever their intention, but that's the modern WWE audience for you. Then we had a girls' match between Summer Rae and Emma that can be easily summed up by the cue card Bayley came out to the ring with. Summer teeth, summer yellow, summer green. By the way, summer misspelled twice on that poster. 2 M's. You would think, too, shouldn't Emma know that? Whatever. And that was followed by an equally horrible skit as Tyler Breeze, a grown adult man, yet again referred to another grown adult man on this program as Uggo. I just want everybody to keep this in mind. This was the show aimed at the 18 to 35 adult male audience. So far on this program, we've seen a damn near 15-minute girls match where one of them came out to the ring dancing with bubbles. And we've now seen an alleged adult man dressed in pink fluffy ring gear call another man Uggo. The fuck am I doing with my life, man? To be honest, I probably should have just started watching at the 20-minute mark, because that's kind of where the show began for me. At least the content worth actually talking about in great detail. The sit-down was Cesaro, Sami Zayn, and, to a lesser extent, Renee Young. Kind of filling the void as the moderator, although that did not really pan out as intended. And the premise was very simple. Neither guy was permitted to touch each other at the threat of losing a potential title shot on both ends. And for Sami, it was the threat of losing an NXT title shot for the remainder of 2014. And for Cesaro, it was the threat of losing a spot in the Elimination Chamber, which I believe he already qualified for. And it was very well done how they shot it. Cesaro's just being totally dismissive of Sami, interrupting him constantly, never letting him get a word in edgewise. Like, there's a point where Sammy's trying to bring up the history between him and Cesaro. Cesaro's sitting there pulling out his phone and scrolling, while also looking at his watch. I love that bit, by the way. He's got a fucking phone with a built-in clock. But he still has to look down to check his watch, just because he's that much of a prick. And, it's one of those interviews where the more Cesaro keeps interrupting, the more fed up Sammy gets. So finally he gets in Cesaro's face and says that everything has become more than personal. After NXT TakeOver next week, there will be nothing for Cesaro to say when Sammy beats him in the middle of the ring. And, well, somehow this rendered Cesaro speechless. He just kind of walked away and had nothing to say. It was a very strange ending. But it was good with how they laid it out. And again, following the way they've been going about building the story, Cesaro's been full of hot air for a very long time. He's been totally frivolous when it comes to his interactions with Sammy on TV. But now it's gotten to the point where Sammy's fed up with all of it. And when you see Cesaro walk away at the end here, there's that little switch that you can kind of see flipping in his head where he's like, all right, this guy's talking serious now, so I guess I should be all business. So I like how they laid it all out. It's been very well done. The interplay between both individuals, the exchanges we've seen between them, great stuff. And when we talk about that match next week, you'll see why I put those NXT TakeOver shows on the map as must-see events. People still talk about that match to this day. So after about another 40 minutes of network infomercial plugs, we eventually get this Adrian Neville versus Tyler Breeze match. Oh, main event, by the way. I don't know if that was worth mentioning or not. I mean, to be fair, it's not like we haven't already seen this match once before. Didn't we literally just talk about this exact match like 2 or 3 weeks ago? With virtually the exact same finish? Like, I'm not saying it was bad or anything, but I mean, it really was no different from the last time we saw these guys wrestle. Like, Neville's getting the title shot against Bo next week, so the finish was predictable from out of the gate. It was a lot more competitive than I thought it would be. Like, I get Breeze is somebody they're grooming up the card right now, but on the other hand, I'm not really sure why it's taken their current number one contender well over 10 minutes to beat Tyler fucking Breeze of all people. I mean, there were a couple interesting moments here. I like the spot where Breeze went to throw a drop kick when Neville was coming off for a springboard, but then Neville just kind of stopped himself so Breeze would crash and burn. And then Breeze ended up surprising Neville with a super kick like 2 seconds later. That was crafty. But Neville won with a red arrow clean. Again, exactly how their previous bout ended. And then that led to the Dallas Neville face-off afterwards so they could try to milk some last-minute hype for the ladder match next week. And Bo basically comes out and does the condescending heel promo on Neville, saying he's done such a phenomenal job getting to this point, but this is where his momentum stops. To which Neville gets on the mic and explains that it took him a long time to figure out what Bo's issue was with him. It's not hate, but it's fear. Fear that Bo knows after next week, Neville is going to walk out as the new NXT champion, and there's nothing he can do about it. And just to give Bo a fair trade-off, he'll let him take one shot this week, one clean punch to Neville's face. So off comes the suit coat, up go the sleeves. Bo's teasing that he's going to fire one up on Neville. But instead, he walks away like a coward. And it was fairly simple last-minute build. Decent enough go-home angle. Removing the annoying part of Neville using Bo's name every other word in the sentence. There was nothing they said or did here that was wrong. I just kind of think people figured that this was the moment it was time for Bo to drop the strap. We've seen the back and forth exchanges between these guys for a while. I don't think talking was ever really Neville's strong suit, so the promos weren't really doing him any favors. But then again, they weren't really moving the needle any differently here than the previous encounters they've had. As the final angle before the actual match, it was just kind of meh. Popcorn fart in a lot of ways. The other problem too, I think, is that while they did announce the ladder stipulation, have they ever really explained why this was a ladder match to begin with? Again, I know people look back at this match with fond memories and say it's kind of a monumental moment in the archives of NXT, but from a story standpoint, if you really think about how they've gone to this point in the feud, why is it a ladder match? Can anyone rationally explain that? I'm still kind of lost on it. So, we all know it's coming in the next week. The people, I think, moreover, were just kind of ready for a title change. So it is good they capitalized on it while Bo still had a reasonable amount of heat. I don't think Neville was ever the initial babyface of choice for a lot of the fans. Certainly not the one to beat Bo for the title. I think a lot of people kind of wanted Sammy to have that spot, but no. It was all part of their slow burn build to let Sammy climb back to the top of the card. That underdog story, if you will. So unfortunately, this was kind of one of those pit stop moments where they had to sacrifice Sammy's build to give it to Adrian Neville instead. And, he was a serviceable babyface to kind of fill that spot for the time being, but again, I don't think he was ever somebody that people rally behind unanimously. So, we'll see how they react to the title change next week. Anything to get the belt off of Bo, right? And that's the mentality at this point. So, as we wrap the show up here again, just want to keep everybody in the loop for next weekend. It will be a little bit of a different format. We'll still do Retro Raw, we'll still do Retro NXT, but the Elimination Chamber show is going to be the one that will take place at the SmackDown review. And I also have to make sure I go into the archives and search for the NXT Takeover special, because I think that's actually in a different section on the Peacock network. It's not in the regular timeline of the NXT episodes, so I have to make a mental note of that. But thanks everybody for watching, and catch you on Friday for the next installment of the Retro Review series. Take care. Peace.